SDGs. Our chair today will be Mr. Denis Penuel, who is the CEO of Sitcom. Mr. Penuel, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Bruno, and hello to everyone. We're going to discuss an important topic today about SDGs and service continuity. Of course, this is a conference on water and climate, and so the issue is more centered around the issue of water, but service continuity is also something that applies more broadly to all services, citizen services. To ensure service is a promise that is made to the citizens in general. And the service offer has to be adapted to people's needs. It has to be financially sustainable, and its impact on the environment, its environmental impact has to be managed. And of course, it mustn't lead to collateral damage. From the very beginning, and during the whole life cycle of the service, meaning almost infinitely, one must always think of the sustainability and durability of the service. And it also has to be popular. And by this, I mean that it has to be adapted to people's expectations and needs. So if we were to describe these services, and in order to link this issue up with the question of SDGs, then services have to be robust. And by this, I mean that they have to ensure continuity. The water service, as waste services, as the energy service, has to be provided on a daily basis, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. These services must also be resilient. They have to be able to resist various difficulties, various crises, and it's important to think about these crises, to keep them in mind from the very beginning and throughout the whole life cycle of the service. One has to plan for being able to put service utilities back into service when there are disruptions. These are so-called contingency plans that have to be taken into account. We also have to take into account a more and more complex environment. Changes have to be anticipated. Changes when it comes to the various factors, more global factors, such as climate change, as well, and the different shapes that climate change is taking in the different environments, the rarefaction of resources. And one must also take into account citizens' expectations. And you'll see that we have 4 presentations that are connected to this issue, which is quite a broad issue of service, this issue of service continuity. We'll hear Madame Eusen, who will tell us about adaptation, the adaptation to societal expectations in France, in the Paris area. We've also got colleagues from Cairo, from Egypt, who will be telling us about the interconnection between the water service and culture, which is something that is very important. I was saying earlier on that public utilities have to be popular. We also have an intervention about the anticipation one needs to have when it comes to the evolution of large mega cities, of large cities. We'll be talking about the situation in Lima, in Peru, and finally, we'll hear from Senegal. We have a colleague who will be talking about the management of aquifers and the possible pollution, as well as long-lasting water provision in Senegal. So that is our program. It's quite a full program, and so I suggest that we kick off right away with the first talk, the presentation, which is by a researcher at the French research agency, the CNRS. Agathe Eugène will be talking to us about a topic that has gained a lot of traction in the cities in Paris, as well as the surrounding cities in France. You might know that Paris and the Seine-Saint-Denis department will be all the organizers of the next Olympic Games in 2024. And so a promise has been made, and that is that the events, the swimming events, will take place in the river that flows through Paris, the Seine River. And there's also been a promise to leave as a legacy to the citizens of Paris to give them the possibility to be able to bathe in the Seine. And so there's been a lot of work done in the last few years on this topic of swimming in the Seine, and Agathe Eugène will present it to us now. Good morning. Can you see my screen properly? I'm not sure if you can hear and see me. Yes, we can hear you and we can see the screen, or at least that's the case here in the room at UNESCO. Okay, but however, I can see that I can't click on the links. So I'll just tell you next slide when I want you to change it. Anyway, thank you very much for this introduction, and it's a great pleasure for me, as well as for my colleague Jean-Paul Haga, who I'll represent today as well, to be able to present to you the work we've been doing for quite a few years on the issue of swimming in waterways, and especially in an urban environment. And I'll be talking about the example of Paris. So this is the summary of my talk. I'll tell you about the introduction and context, then I'll talk about the methodology. I'll present the study that we carried out, then I'll present the results of this study, the main results, which stem from the work that we've done. So you can see, well, who has never wanted to go and walk along a river, a waterway, and to maybe jump into the water, either to fulfill a basic need or just for fun? And for many years, forever, people have swam in waterways. And what we realized is that swimming in waterways in urban environments, and more particularly, was the object of more and more social demands, especially when it came to when there were heat waves within cities. People wanted to swim in the river more and more. And so we were wondering whether among these people who like swimming in urban waterways, we wanted to find out who are the people who like to go and bathe in the rivers, and when they want to go and bathe, and what is their idea of the quality of the water in urban rivers, given the urban pressures and the representations we often have of the low quality of water in these environments. So following the various projects that the city of Paris had set up, for example, it had created in 2017 a special site that was dedicated to bathing. And on this site, we could carry out regular water tests to make sure its quality was adequate, and also security infrastructure was guaranteed in these areas. And so this allowed us to also carry out research about the about this controlled swimming environment and compare it to wild swimming in places where it is not officially allowed. In 2019, we carried out a study on 2 sites in the Paris area, on the Ourcq Canal, which is in the northeast of Paris. And this is a part, this is a site where the water is the same because it is a canal. And then there's another space which where there are 2 different spaces, which you can see on the map. It's the little blue spot on the lower map. So this is the official swimming site that I talked to you about just now, the place where you can swim in all security. And then there's another spot, which you can see in red, which is 3 kilometers further up. This is near the Parc de la Villette. And this is a place where a great number of people, so other than coming to picnic or walk around the park with their friends, some people also like bathing in this space, whereas swimming in that area where the red spot is forbidden. So we interviewed 530 people who are not, it's not a representative sample, but we did face-to-face interviews with 530 people on these swimming sites. So 305 in the official swimming site and 225 people interviewed in the Villette Park where bathing is forbidden. We did these interviews, and we also interviewed the various services of the Paris authorities who are responsible for these areas and for the swimming area. Now, here you can see what this, what the official river swimming site looks like, or rather the canal swimming site. It is a temporary site which is set up on the canal, and there is a system of floating barges that allows to filter the canal water and to fill 4 pools, 2 small ones that you can see on the foreground, which are shallow pools, and then deeper pools, which you can see in the background. The last one is mainly for swimming. It is a deep pool. You can also see that on the left, there is a relaxation space where there are deck chairs and families come to picnic and spend their free time if they're not swimming. Children have to come accompanied if they want to swim, and that's why you can see parents sitting around the pool who are watching over their children who are playing in the shallow pools. Generally speaking, this is a free space. It is supervised. The water quality is monitored all day long to make sure that people can safely benefit from this service. And our survey showed that the people who use these pools are mainly Parisians, people who come from the surrounding areas, so they're rather residential areas, and also some of the swimmers come from the surrounding departments of the north of Paris, the close suburbs, who also come there to bathe. Many tourists also come to take a dip in these pools. It's a form of attractiveness, it's an attraction of the city for tourists to be able to come and swim in the very heart of Paris. And so this is one of the arguments that is put forward by the city of Paris to say that this is a great tourist activity, a real magnet. It's usually young adults and teenagers and mainly boys who like to come in groups to swim in these spaces, usually during the day. From the moment the space opens, the lifeguards have told us that there are regulars who come and do their laps around the pool, and then there are other people who come to take a dip in the pool after they get off work in the afternoon. Here you can see the number of entries to the space and how many people went swimming in the year 2019, in which there was a very strong heat wave, which made this managed space even more attractive. From the moment the space opened, there was a large number of people who wanted to gain access to the space, either to swim or to relax. And you can see that the demand was particularly high during the heat wave moments. The temperature in Paris on the 25th of July reached 42 degrees, which is an extremely rare event in France, and I hope it doesn't happen very often in future. On the chart, you can see there are some red stars. These red stars are moments when the space was closed to bathing because of pollution, because the quality of the water was not sufficient to guarantee safe swimming conditions. When the pools are closed for swimming, this doesn't mean that people can't swim in the informal areas, in these areas where there is less supervision of swimming activities. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, 3 kilometers further north of the official swimming area, there is this other space where people come to sit on the side of the canal, to sit down, to picnic, to possibly dip their toes in the water. Or some people can't resist the temptation to take a jump and to actually have a swim, even though this is actually illegal. The water quality here is different than in the other space, since there's nothing floating on the water. People don't have anything that will stop them from swimming. However, it is a bit difficult to get out of the water depending on the height of the banks of the canal.
Avec une perception de la qualité qui est intéressante.
Bathing in these open areas depend on a certain amount of trust from the users as to the quality of the water and also as to the security of the swimming site. People think the quality of the water is good since it is monitored, and since the results of the water analyses are publicly made available. That is for the controlled areas. In areas that are not organized, where the fact that you can't see the bottom of the water does not actually create a barrier to people wanting to swim. It's simply the fact that nothing's floating on the surface that gives people enough confidence to jump in the water. The periods of heat waves and high temperatures is what mainly motivates people to go and jump in the water. And so this is in line with the whole reflection about the return to nature in the city, to be able to have the means to go and swim in nature in the city. There's a certain number of organizations, of associations and NGOs who, from the 1990s, have been active by reopening various swim sites and making creating access to the water. And these projects have been a form of taking ownership of these spaces by the people in these areas, which is quite interesting. And as you'll see on the next slide, This example really shows that this project that was set up by the city of Paris in the last few years really does meet a need. It meets people's expectations and improves the quality of life and the environmental quality that a city can set up in a context of sustainable development. And so we can refer to the sustainable development goals, the ones that are linked to the city, like the SDG 11 or SDG or the SDGs that are linked to public health, for example. And it is in this direction that the services have been working in order to make this water even cleaner than it already is. But of course, we can't control everything, but we can do the necessary to make sure that for the Paris Olympic Games in 2024, the rivers will be fit for swimming, and that we'll be able to promote Paris as a bathing city. And this is a concept that we've developed with Mr. Hague, which I hope that my work has shown you how people's perceptions and feelings about these areas reflect on these political actions. And this also allows to set the city apart on the national, international stage.
The next slide, you'll be able to find all the references taking you to the different articles that we published on the issue, covering different dimensions and showing the link between quality measurements of quality done by experts, and a historical approach. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Agathe. Thank you for your presentation, which was extremely clear. And thank you for explaining this concept, bathing cities. And of course, there is a direct link with the SDGs, because we're talking about sustainable cities, cities in which it is pleasant and safe to live. So there are combined benefits, good living conditions and having access to a clean river. Let's not forget the role that rivers play in huge cities. We're talking here about a 10 million people city with a single river. So clean rivers, that's definitely a benefit for everyone. Thank you very much for your presentation. And let's now move on to the following presentation. It's all about research conducted on public toilets, and the perspective will be unique and original, and we will talk about culture and arts. This presentation is by Amir Tadros, who works for the Ministry of Culture in Egypt, and Ouaida Eid, who is the General Director at the International Center within the Cairo Opera. So let me say that the issue concerning public toilets is so important that a World Day dedicated to this issue has been established. It happens every year on the 19th of November. And I'm sure that today's presentation will tell us more about these two domains, and we will learn a lot. So thank you very much, Amir and Ouaida. You have the floor.
Hello? Hello, do you hear me?
We can hear you.
I think that the connection is not good, so maybe we'll turn off the video. Or do you think it's good?
Connection is working, you are online.
If it's good, we'll keep talking with the video. Hello? Bonjour.
Yes, sure, go ahead. Yes, please, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, thank you. On behalf of my colleague Amir Tadros, myself, Wairaid, I'd like to you all, dear organizing committee, dear Mr. Penwell, the president of the session, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to begin by extending our gratitude to the moderator, the secretariat, the panelists, and many others for this meeting during these difficult times of COVID-19 pandemic. We hope all of you will be safe. Allow us also to extend our heartfelt appreciation to each one of you for kindly setting aside some time out of your busy schedules to grace us with your presence. Thank you very much indeed. Our argument is why culture and art are very important for world public policy implications towards the problem of public toilets. And what are the linkages between public toilets, art, culture, social entrepreneurship, social innovation, and economy? Next slide, please. The SDG 6 recognizes that countries' social development and economic prosperity depend on the sustainable management of freshwater resources, sanitation, and ecosystems. One of the unspoken areas in this challenge is public toilets. According to the World Health Organization, 2.4 billion people globally do not have access to any kind of improved sanitation facilities. That is over 30% of the world total population. Of these, 892 million still defecating the open air, e.g. in street gutters, behind bushes, or into open bodies of water. Women are particularly badly affected. 50% of schoolgirls in Africa leave school when menstruation starts because of lack of school toilets. On the other hand, first world problems have a different aspect and already have a substantial amount of opportunity, yet you can claim about equality and the backyards. So it has recently been the object of theoretical questions, empirical evaluations, and debates anchored in the relevant judicial and legal frameworks. But generally speaking, we can say that everyone, not just the poor, is affected by public health inequality. In this study, we wanted to shed light on acknowledging the pivotal role that art, cultural beliefs, and traditions play in shaping identity through design and public toilets, as well as acknowledging that such codes are not neutral functional objectives, but rather reflect and reproduce deep-seated cultural beliefs that shape the design of the spaces of our daily lives, and it can be also a big chance for social innovation and positive economy. In addition, such innovations can present opportunities to promote micro-entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and enhance economic incomes. Next slide, please. At first sight, it might be surprising that we are trying to link public toilets with art, culture, social entrepreneurship, social innovation, and economy. But because service delivery is fundamental for people, we need to increase the focus on factors beyond developing infrastructure and to understand how insights from behavioral science can help social enterprises address behavioral challenges of the urban series, and one of them is culture aspects, triggering people's behavior that brings either success or failure to such projects. And those people at the core of the service delivery challenge. Shit business is serious business. Everyone must go to the toilet. Going to the toilet is the only thing you cannot delegate to anybody else. No matter how big, no matter how rich you are, you can never ask someone to go to the toilet on your behalf. You've got to do it yourself at least once or twice a day. So going to the toilet becomes very important to everyone. In this slide, we show you the user views on public toilets from the inside, looking for the appearance, location, signature, access. From the inside, looking for the security, fixtures, fittings, cleanliness, payment, and attendance. And for the facilities, how are the facilities for disabilities, breast products, baby, unisex, urinal separate, but no one looks for culture. This is still an obscure room. Next slide. Aspiration is a universal part of the human experience, and it's really in taboo. Psychologists form the field of other taboos, such as sex and death, but they have largely ignored education. Nevertheless, it's linked to a rich assortment of intense emotions, mental disorders, personality traits, social attitudes, and cultural practices. It turns out that there is a significant art in the psychology of expression related to public toilets, but it's widely dispersed on often obscure, including history, religions, human rights, freedom of expression, traditions, laws, and legislations. Next slide, please. For example, for wrong mental images, out of the 200 graffiti collected and analyzed, 59, which is 29.2%, were in the men's bathroom, and 143, which is 70.8%, were in the women's bathrooms. These findings seems to contradict reports that females are less inclined to vandalize due to their inclination to conform to social conventions and norms. The next slide. Fortunately, there is a growing recognition in recent studies of the contributions of art and culture to finding creative solutions for global challenges, and both civil society and social entrepreneurs are beginning to acknowledge the transversal nature of culture and consequently its value to sustainable development, environment, education, health, and social cohesion, among other things. In its role as a catalyst, culture can contribute to a better quality of public toilets. This is, as you can see, this is the poster of an Indian movie that changes the perspective of having a toilet inside the houses. I invite you to look at the link and find out more about this one. Next slide, please. To make change happen, first and foremost, we require changing perceptions. Public toilets are a necessity and a right as well. Talking about them should not be a taboo. We do not need new and fancy utilities. Instead, we need sanitary, easy to use, accessible, and secure facilities to protect public health and to make life easier for common people. And to achieve these, there are 5 main principles, all related to the cultural dimension. We have to use to change behaviors at the bottom of the pyramid. 1, don't try to fix the person, fix the context. 2, decrease the hassle factor. 3, address inattention. 4, create new social norms. And 5, address present bias. Next slide, please. There are many cultural fields that intersect with public toilets, most notably from toilet history and museums, proverbs and quotes, handicrafts, stories and legends, signage and graphics, customs, religions and beliefs, graffiti on the walls, design, drawing, sculpture, and artwork. Here is for the Mexican toilets, where you can see the hand-painted toilet, and the Japan's famous toilet museum. Next slide, please. Decision makers and culture workers should be encouraged to launch an inquiry into the state of arts, culture, and creative placemaking as it relates to the public toilet sector, with the aim of identifying barriers and opportunities for further investment and investigation to understand the following. One, what types of problems or practices exist at the intersection of public toilets and creative placemaking, particularly in communities with high levels of justice system interaction? Second, to what extent is public toilets considered an outcome of creative placemaking efforts? Three, what opportunities exist for further collaboration between creative placemaking and the public toilet sector? Next slide, please. In the future public toilet strategy, we have to work to reposition arts and culture as a core sector of community planning and development. Next slide, please. Art and culture in their relations with public toilets can create a strong community identity, community pride, and sense of place across a variety of culture settings. It also contributes to urban renewal and design, and hence in promoting tourism industry. The need to rethink about public toilet strategy and look to the public toilet as a creative placemaker in which art plays an intention, an integrated role in place-based community planning and development. We have to believe that public toilet development must be locally informed, human-centric, and holistic. Next slide, please.
Merci
I'd
beaucoup.
like to thank you. Yeah, we would like to thank you all once again for giving us the opportunity to present our research. Thank you. It only happened due to your hard work and professional commitments. Thank you so much, and congratulations for holding for the whole team of EauMega for holding this distinguished conference. Thank you all. Merci.
Alors, merci beaucoup pour cette...
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was indeed a fascinating presentation, and you will be able to find the slides and the presentation on the UNESCO site. Unfortunately, the internet connection was not very good, but I believe that we have understood the essential message. Thank you very much for your presentation. And now let's move on with Jérémy Robert. Jérémy has a PhD in geography from the Grenoble University. He researches governance and in Latin America, and he will make a presentation on the 5th largest city in South America, that is Lima in Peru. Jérémy? Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for introducing myself. Can we please show my presentation on the screen? Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure for me to make a presentation on the research I conducted in Lima, Peru's capital. It's all done within the framework of SDGs. My presentation will be on network extension in water crisis context in Lima. And I suggest an analysis of the policies implemented in self-built settlements as well as in big real estate projects. Next slide, please. So I will start with an introduction on the issue of water network extension in Lima. I'll tell you then a few words concerning the methodology that I used. Then I'll present the results in terms of urban governance, in terms of water resource, and then I will talk about water network extension in informal settlements and then extensions in real estate projects. The idea here is to identify common elements and see what are the policies that are being implemented in these in both contexts. Now, to start with, let me remind you that in Lima, there are more than 10 million inhabitants living in the middle of a desert. It is the second largest city in a desert following Cairo. So it's a good thing we had a presentation from Egypt before my presentation. There's increasing demand for water network extensions in order to connect new housing, and there is an increasing vulnerability linked to climate change. So the question that I ask myself is the following: what are the policy responses in order to meet the challenge? So there are three main debates here. The first one is about the type of network. Are we talking about the universalization of the water service based on the model of networked city? And at the same time, there's a coexistence and hybridization of multiple types of systems. So what kind of approach are the policies in Lima implementing? Second debate, we have to go beyond stigmatizing urban governance and see what is being done on the field. And third debate, we have to think about the socio-political factors within the water crisis and who actually uses the water crisis and why. Next slide, please. So what is the methodology that I used? Well, I used multiple sources, multiple points of view concerning water resources, urban networks, urban governance, and I also benefited from the data collected within the Blue Grass project. Research was conducted on different types of questions. There was a desalination project, water policies, urban development policies. Next slide, please. So the first result is the identification of different elements and try to understand how policies are being developed and to what extent they're difficult to implement. So we have seen that water networks and urban development planning are being disconnected, and there's a context of water scarcity, which makes the whole situation even more difficult. Local authorities have limited capacities, and there's also a conflict with central authorities. Now, water scarcity is very important. This area is particularly exposed to droughts, and there are real uncertainties linked to climate change. So there's an official perspective which really focuses on finding new water sources and on increasing the tariffs. So what are the impacts on water network extensions? Now, when it comes to informal settlements, what is important here is to underline that major progress have been made, but there are still about 700,000 people without a connection to the water network. Now, since the 1990s, policies have been implemented in order to implement different solutions to overcome different constraints. There are physical constraints, the availability of water resources, the type of neighborhood. There are legal obstacles, there are economic barriers and political difficulties. Now, to give you a concrete example, water stations, small water stations have been built following the cholera epidemic. This is the picture you can see on the right. And you have another example. You have the election campaign favoring huge projects concerning water distribution networks. So policies are very different, and they illustrate the fact that there are very different approaches being implemented on the ground. And you can see here that areas can be connected and other areas can be difficultly connected, and there are negotiations going on. And politically speaking and socially speaking, this area is very fragmented. So there are major stakes, major issues which are at stakes here that really cover different types of aspects: social, political, technical, etc. Now, concerning water network extension for real estate projects, there was a real boom in at the end of the 1990s, the beginning of the year 2000. The situation is difficult. The construction sector is a major sector for the country. Now, there are different possibilities when it comes to water network extension. First possibility, the public operator is in charge of connecting new buildings to the water network, or it's the local authorities who are in charge. And sometimes when connection prices are too high, the projects are simply abandoned. And then there are mega projects, huge projects, which are being developed and for which the private sector is in charge of all the costs, which increases the selling prices of flats. So it all depends on public resources, public capacities, on the availability of water resources, and on economic growth priorities. And operators play a major role when it comes to the regulation of real estate projects. The pictures on the slide show you that the brand new desalination plant, which was constructed in order to service the huge buildings on the coast. Next slide, please. Now, to conclude, I'd like to insist on the following facts. First of all, the evolution of the network over time depends. It all depends on the conditions on the ground. It depends on the technical constraints. It depends on the funds available and on the political context. Second conclusion, the goal of building a universal network remains a priority. Third conclusion, there are real tensions between the priorities that can seem contradictory, and there's a real competition for resources, informal settlements versus real estate development, who should be connected to the network in priority. This is all linked to social policy and neoliberal urban development. fourth conclusion, there are informal arrangements which are in constant negotiation. And finally, water scarcity. Water scarcity is a very real constraint, and it's also an argument that is used by many to defend contradictory projects. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for having transported us to South America, and having talked to us about this important topic of drinking water supply. We will now hear Mr. Abdoulaye Cissé from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation of Senegal. He's responsible for the planning and management of water resources, and he will be talking to us about the issue of water resource sustainability in the Dakar area and beyond. Because let me remind you that Dakar and Senegal are the hosts of the World Water Forum that will take place on the sidelines of the World Water Day on the 22nd of March of this year. Mr. Abdoulaye, I give you the floor. Thank you very much. So many thanks. I'd like to take this opportunity participating in this very important conference to commend all the participants and UNESCO for this event. So my topic today is overexploitation, degradation of water resource quality, and risk management in the face of sustainable water demand in the Greater Dakar region. My presentation, we will follow the following layout. First, we'll have an introduction, which I'll present the study area and the hydrogeological context. Then I'll present the methodology that we used. Then I will present the quantitative and qualitative status of groundwater resources in the Greater Dakar area. I'll also present the assessment of the current availability of water systems and the analysis of future needs by catchment area, as well as the management of the hydraulic subsector in the area. So this is a map of the Greater Dakar region. It's located between 14 degrees 35 and 14 degrees 53 north latitude and 1654 and 17 degrees 32 west longitude. This area includes 66 communes and the large urban expansion centers of Dimendiando, Diasebi, Daga-Holpa, and the Lac Rose as the agricultural centers of the southern Yais and Tiesmour axis. In this area, 68% is occupied by 68% of Senegal's urban population, with an estimated population of 10,740,368 people. That is the number that the population by 2035. It is one of the main economic centers of the country, has tropical climate, the oceanic influence. We've noticed a certain decrease in rainfall in recent years. It's now is around 450 to 700 millimeters per year, whereas it used to be between 500 and 800 millimeters per year in the period 1931-1960. This reduction in rainfall has an impact in groundwater reserve capacity. From the hydrogeological point of view, this area is made up of two main aquifer systems. There's the Quaternary Sands hydrogeological system from Dakar to Kaya, with a reservoir that is made up of sands and clay sands resting on a marl wall. Then there is another system. We call it the dice horse system, which extends over the rest of the entire remainder of the area with two main hydrological units. The first is what we call the lower deep complex of sandstone and sandy clay formation of the Maastrichtian. And then there's the upper complex of the Quaternary, Eocene, and Paleocene formations. The methodology we used for this research was, on the one hand, a bibliographical review of the various studies that had been carried out, and also we used quantitative and qualitative monitoring data and data on the exploitation of water resources. So the results, when it comes to the quantitative and qualitative status of groundwater resources, when it comes to the Maastrichtian aquifer, from a quantitative status, we noticed that in 2019, in April to be more precise, the water table depth varied between 5.6 and 150 meters. We also noticed a continuous drop in water level with a focus on the main catchment areas. From a qualitative point of view, the water is of good quality, except for the area near Mbour, where conductivity can reach 2,500. There is also a continuous increase in electroconductivity. When it comes to the Paleocene aquifers, the water table depth in April 2019 was between 6.9 meters and 57.2 meters, with a continuous drop with the trough in the catchment areas. The electroconducticity, from a qualitative point of view, is situated between 378 and 7,160 microsieverts, higher in the coastal areas, where there is a higher risk of saline intrusion. The nitrate levels are relatively low. They're lower than 40 milligrams per liter. As for the subasaltic sands of Dakar, the water table depths from a quantitative point of view were between 2.24 and 31.9 meters, with a flow from the coast to the catchment area. There's also a high risk of saline infiltration. As the diagram you can see at the bottom. As for the Thyre Quaternary sands, the water depths are lower than 7 meters, which makes it very vulnerable. This is also reflected by its poor quality. There is a high level of pollutions, with nitrate levels around 320 milligrams per liter. This is also goes hands in hand with high electroconductivity. So when it comes to the exploitation of the different hydraulic resources by aquifer, we took samples of 48.3 million cubic meters per year in 2016 for the Maastrichtian, 40.3 million cubic meters for the Paleocene. We saw that the use for the Maastrichtian was mainly 60% for urban water supply, 27% was used for mining, 0.7% was used for agriculture, and 0.5% for rural water supply. In the Paleocene area, 75% were used for agriculture, 14.5% of the water for urban water supply, and 10% for rural water supply. As for the subbasaltic sands, which are near in the capital, the area of the capital city, 34,000 cubic meters were used in 2018 and were used exclusively for urban water supply. As for the SIAAPs, because of the high pollution level and the high electroconductivity, this system has been abandoned and is no longer used, which also highlights flooding in high rainfall periods. For the Maastrichtian and Paleocene, there's a global withdrawal of 88.6 million cubic meters per year and a renewal potential of 30 million cubic meters. So you can see for yourself that there is a very large deficit balance. For the subbasaltic water table, with an expectation rate of 34,000 cubic meters, the refill is of 11,000 cubic meters per year. So there is also a large deficit balance, and there is an important threat of a salt wedge. So in terms of future needs by catchment area, we carried out calculations in order to calculate the deficit percentage in relation to the availability. We calculated this percentage by catchment area in the Greater Dakar area. This provided us with the results on this table. This work was carried out from 2015 will be carried out till 2050, and it shows, when you look at this table, that everything that's in red means that there is a very severe deficit, whereas what you see in green represents satisfactory deficits, meaning that they are manageable or acceptable. So if you analyze this table, already in 2020, only 2 catchment areas in Tiade and Thiès, only those 2 catchment areas were satisfactory. They're the only ones that were not experiencing a deficit. But from 2025 onwards, all the catchment areas will have a deficit except for Tiadai until 2050. So one must also note that this deficit would be even greater if we took into account the assessment of if we took into account the poor quality of the water in certain areas. Quality was not taken into account in this table. So this means that the deficit could be even greater if poor quality was taken into account. So to counteract this deficit, the government, through the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, has rolled out various resource mobilization programs to sustainably meet demand. They've carried out projects in Dakar. Even though there's a very high deficit there, we have carried out the drilling of boreholes in order to reinforce the water supply system. The government is also using the surface water reservoir of the Lac de Guiers, which has a capacity of 50,000 cubic meters per day. The water treatment plant nearby also has a capacity of 75,000 cubic meters per day. And there is a desalination seawater plant in Dakar with a capacity of 50,000 cubic meters per day. eventually this plant will be able to produce 100,000 cubic meters per day, whereas the other treatment plant will be able to produce 200,000 cubic meters per day eventually. There's also the construction of a serotonin plant in Dakar. So, main takeaways. It was noted that there was a significant imbalance between the water demand in Greater Dakar and the potential, the mobilizable potential of the various aquifers in the area. The imbalance is accentuated by the deterioration in quality and the drop in renewal potential due to the drop in rainfall. And it's necessary, of course, to search for alternative sources based on water transfer systems, on using surface water, groundwater in other areas and in other regions of the countries, but also to implement different water treatment strategies. So I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I'd like to also take this opportunity to mention my colleagues whom I did this work with. Dr. Nico Ndour, Abdou Aziz Nging, and Sergei Fay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Abdoulaye, for your presentation, which was very clear on the water provision in the Greater Dakar area. So we've reached the end of our 4 presentations, and so it's time to, if you so desire, ask some questions. I have a first question for Agathe. The question is, you were talking about bathing cities. Can all cities be made into bathing cities? I mean, beyond the sole issue of water quality, will citizens in all cities turn to their rivers in order to swim in them? Well, thank you very much for this question. I'd say that this is a concept that creates a certain framework to think about what is a bathing city, a city that can be taken ownership of by the inhabitants so that they can use the rivers for swimming, and that also take into account environmental quality. So there's many different factors that create a whole framework that aims at qualifying the quality of a waterway in order to meet certain leisure uses, being able to take a swim guarantees a certain level of water quality. But I'll give you a counterexample. If you look at the Ganges in India, people bathe in it in order to purify themselves. But unfortunately, this is a river that is particularly badly polluted. And so it does show this mismatch between the perception people have of a waterway and the use that's made of it, or the symbolic value that's attributed to it. So I think we're not in a position now to speak about bathing cities when it comes to the cities that are situated on the banks of the Ganges. But if we follow this logic, and when it comes to the various efforts that have been carried out in France, and there's also other examples in Berlin, in London, and the waterways in these places can be managed in order to allow for bathing. And this improves the ecosystem and the standard of living for the population. And I think that in those examples, I think it is easier to speak of bathing cities as long as certain criteria are taken into account. Thank you. I have a question from Sofia and Andalusi, who has a question for Jeremy. In your experience, the network extensions of drinking water, is this something that can slow down a city's development, or does it systematically lead to a reduction in the quality of the service or an impoverishment of heritage?
Thank you very much for your question. What we can see in Lima, where there are not enough connections to the network in major real estate development projects and in self-built settlements, it's all linked to the capacity of the local authorities to establish these connections. And this capacity could limit the expansion, the urban expansion in the area. In poorer neighborhoods or in big real estate projects. So it could be a way of limiting self-built settlements, although there are very strong pressures on the local authorities for these connections to be established. It also means there will be pressures on urban promoters, and if connections are not established, then things cannot evolve in these areas. So how is this linked to the issue of the quality of the service and the preservation of heritage? Well, the issue here is finding the right solution and bringing together conflicting interests. What I think is, what is interesting is all the choices that are made to ensure quality of the service, while at the same time meeting conflicting demands in this area where urban development is very dynamic. Thank you very much. Following question to Mr. Abdoulaye Cissé. How does Senegal find the right balance between demand and water supply? Well, thank you very much for this question. A few years ago, the situation was very difficult. There were water shortages, and tankers had to be used to distribute water in different districts of the city. And these strategies are combined with the drilling of boreholes. And KMS3, for example, is here to strengthen the use of surface water. So the situation is more or less stable. And we hope that the solutions that have been identified will be deployed more extensively. But there are other programs too. Several studies are being conducted by the Directorate for Water Resources and Distribution. The idea here is to identify new sources of water, and the company which manages urban waters and water resources is working on the drilling of new boreholes to make sure there's more water available in Dakar and in sufficient volumes to meet the local demand. And there's a desalination plant which is used to process water of a poorer quality. So all this is done in order to find a better balance between production, offer and supply. Thank you very much. Thank you. We now have a question by Sarita Donti. How can countries finance sanitation in all countries? How can it be developed? I don't know who amongst the panelists can answer to this question. It's all linked to the issue of having access to toilets too. Now I'd like to say one thing concerning France. For the last 15 years or so, every single service in charge of water and sanitation can use 1% of its budget for international projects. So there are agreements signed between French local authorities and local authorities from countries and developing countries. The objective is to contribute to the SDGs, in particular the one on sanitation and drinkable water. And I am aware of the fact that other countries have similar projects. They use a public fund or private funds. Does anyone wish to complement my answer, or would you like me to move on to the next question? Oh, I see Jeremy wants to take the floor. Yes, I'd like to add something which I didn't say in my presentation. Within the framework of urban development projects, when there's no connection made to the water network, there's one argument that is sometimes brought forward, and that is the fact that there's not enough sanitation networks. And so the strategy here is to make sure that the costs entailed are borne by the private sector, by the private operator, and usually the public operators have to cover the cost. But here they're trying to find a new balance between public and private operators. In the agreements that are being signed, sanitation is another major aspect when we talk about water networks. And I think the question of how is it possible to finance sanitation networks is a very interesting question, and it has an impact on the extension of water networks in these cities. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have one more question, which was posted on the internet. Imran Aziz asked the following question. Are there any technical developments that enable us to follow the quality of the level in aquifers? Do we have methods that enable us to have reliable data that we can use to make predictions? Thank you very much, Abdoulaye. You have the floor. Yes, indeed. I think that when it comes to monitoring and collecting data on underground waters, we use remote systems. We actually put specific equipment and on the ground, and that really helps us to get data in real time, data concerning the concentration in salt or the quality of the water. So we receive real-time data, and we can really monitor the quality of these waters and their evolution. Thank you very much. I have one last question put by Julia Mautier. This question is put to Agathe. How did you identify the population's expectations in the Paris area? At what point can you actually say there is a real expectation here? People want to swim in the rivers. At what point can you actually determine that? Well, first of all, some associations have decided to act in order to improve the quality of water in rivers and enable bathing in these rivers. And then there are events which also have an impact. We have the jump event, which is a national event. And during these events, people living near rivers are encouraged to plunge and dive into water, to take ownership of these rivers. So there are different parameters, events and actions that are taken into account. Now, of course, there is the wild swimming phenomenon, which is developing, and this has an important impact. Consequences can be important, sanitary consequences, but also sanitary ones. And these consequences have to be taken into account by city authorities. So this is what we can observe on the general level. And at the same time, we need to set rules. We need to promote all the efforts that are undertaken in order to ensure water quality, water treatment, and all this is part of a general effort to improve water. And this is also linked to a political context. We actually take all these parameters together, and we can see that water plays a very important role in the cities, especially during heat waves. For example, water is important to reduce the level of temperatures, to improve living conditions. And this is why the Paris authorities have decided to help the city evolve over time and make it become a green city. And there's also a competition between cities, and being able to swim in an urban river illustrates the quality of living conditions in a specific city. Thank you very much. Thank you, Agathe. It is now time to conclude this session. Let me first of all thank the organizers for this event, and also I'd like to thank UNESCO and ARCEAU. The chair is being interrupted. So I'd like to thank ARCEAU. I had a small question, if you allow me. I'd like to put a question to Jeremy, if you allow me. So we heard presentations on different issues, and this really helps us to better understand service continuity and SDGs. We started off with a presentation on bathing, which means that sanitation networks have to be good. We have to be able to predict water quality. We have to take into account social aspects. All this is important when it comes to service continuity. Then we had a second presentation on public toilets through a very particular perspective, through art and culture. The issue here is accessibility, culture, dignity, of course, and this requires partnerships in order to meet the demand. We're talking about long-term needs. We cannot interrupt these services. And then we moved on to the issue of water network extension with the example of Lima. And this is also linked to the issues of governance, centralization, decentralization, the setting up of hybrid projects. How is it possible to maintain the existing infrastructure and develop it further? And finally, we had a last presentation on Dakar. How can data be processed and help us to have perspectives going all the way to 2050. So the idea here is the link between service continuity and SDGs. So I'd like to thank all the speakers for their excellent presentations. I thank you very much to all of you who followed us on the internet. And in a few minutes, a side event will start. This side event is devoted to water and waste. It will take place in room 4. The link between these two issues is absolutely fundamental because we're talking about a service, and water and waste is also a major issue. So thank you very much, all of you, for your attention, and I wish you a very good day, wherever you are. Thank you very much, Denis. Thank you for this session. Thank you to our speakers this morning. This session is now over. I encourage you to join in the side events or to come back after the lunch break. We will resume at 2. We will have 3 parallel sessions. We'll have a second session devoted to governance, then one on technical and technological solutions, and we will have a regional platform for the Europe North America region, Alliance for Water and Climate. Thank you very much.